On the final day of March in 1945, as the Second World War staggered toward its end, American servicemen stationed at the Frankfurt airfield found themselves staring upward in bewilderment. A lone aircraft was circling above them, moving strangely, wobbling in its pattern as if fighting some unseen mechanical struggle. No one on the ground could determine what they were looking at. The silhouette was unfamiliar, neither matching the shape of an Allied machine nor resembling the typical lines of a German fighter. With weapons drawn and nerves tight, the soldiers prepared for the worst. The pilot inside that mysterious aircraft was battling a jet that refused to retract its landing gear. And in that cockpit sat a German test pilot who had been dreaming of this single opportunity for months, an opportunity that would place him one step away from execution if anything went wrong. He was about to hand over Nazi Germany's most cutting-edge jet to the very forces fighting to destroy the regime he served. Yet the most astonishing chapter of the jet story didn't unfold during the war. It came long after. What happened after this aircraft touched Allied soil would reshape jet aviation for decades to come. Because this machine, the Messerschmitt Me 262, did not simply vanish into the ruins of the Third Reich. It would become a cornerstone of American air supremacy, continue flying under entirely different national colors for years after the war, and even today, in the 20s. This is the astonishing journey of the Me 262 after the fall of Nazi Germany. To understand how extraordinary this moment was, we need to step back to Good Friday, 1945. Hans Fay, a highly experienced Messerschmitt test pilot 57 years old and boasting more than 11,000 hours in the air, had been given a critical assignment: transport a pristine Me 262 jet from the production facility to a safer location before advancing Allied troops over on the plant. 22 pilots have been handed similar tasks, forming a desperate effort to preserve Germany's most prized technological achievement. But Fay's motives were far different. For months, he had been living in quiet torment, waiting for the precise moment when he could defect. Yet one thing had held him hostage. His elderly parents still lived in a quiet German town, and Fay knew with chilling certainty that the Nazi regime would execute them if he defected. His heart, his conscience, and his future had been suspended in place. Then, in the final days of March, news reached him. American forces had taken control of his parents' town. They were finally out of harm's way. The opportunity he had prayed for had arrived. At precisely 1:45 in the afternoon on March 31st, Fay powered up the twin jet engines of the Me 262 and launched into the air. But barely a moment after liftoff, trouble surfaced. The landing gear refused to retract. No matter how many times he cycled the controls, the wheels remained stubbornly locked in place. Fay now had a dangerous choice to make. He could attempt to land on a tiny airstrip near his home, a risky move in perfect conditions, let alone with a malfunctioning jet. Or he could steer toward the larger, more capable runway at Frankfurt's Rhine-Main airfield, which was already under American control. With nerves steady and adrenaline burning through his veins, he banked toward Frankfurt. Imagine the scene as American troops on the ground looked skyward. A sleek silver jet, something none of them had ever seen in person, was limping overhead, its landing gear dangling awkwardly, circling like a wounded bird. Unsure whether it was friend or foe, soldiers took defensive positions, their fingers tightening around their triggers. Fay surveyed the battle-scarred airfield below, selecting the only runway strip left usable after weeks of bombing. With remarkable skill, he brought the unpainted jet down in what Allied reports would later describe as a flawless landing. The canopy opened, and Hans Fay climbed out slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Only then did the American troops realize what they were standing in front of. A pristine, factory-fresh Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter, delivered straight into their hands by the man who knew it better than almost anyone alive. That particular aircraft, identified as work number 111,711, would go on to become the most thoroughly tested Me 262 ever captured by the Allies. Yet its story, like Fay's, was destined for a dramatic and tragic turn. In the chaotic days that followed Germany's collapse, a new competition ignited among the victorious Allies, one far removed from the battlefield. The war itself had ended, but the race to dominate the future of aviation had just begun. Enter Colonel Harold E. Watson, a man whose appearance and swagger seemed torn straight from the pages of an adventure comic. Dressed in a flowing white scarf and polished leather jacket, Watson carried himself with unmistakable confidence. Many would later claim he inspired the fictional hero Steve Canyon, the daring pilot featured in popular comic strips of the era. Watson certainly never denied it. He had been appointed to lead a top-secret initiative known as Operation LUSTY, an acronym for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. Though it was impossible to ignore the cheeky tone, his job was simple in theory but monumental in execution. Gather a team of America's brightest test pilots, mechanics, and engineers, and sweep across the defeated German territory to locate every jet, engine, design, and document tied to the Me 262 before the Soviet Union could seize them. The men under his command became legendary, known as Watson's Whizzers. Their mission placed them in direct competition with more than 30 other Allied intelligence groups, all scrambling to snatch up the remnants of Germany's advanced jet program. In one famous moment, Watson burst dramatically into Lieutenant Robert Strobel's workspace, let his scarf whip behind him, dropped a file onto the desk, and announced, "This is everything we know about the Me 262. Pack your gear and get to Lechfeld. I want pilots trained and aircraft ready to fly." Without further explanation, Watson spun on his heels and disappeared down the corridor. Within 24 hours, Strobel found himself airborne aboard a C-47 heading straight into post-war Germany. When Watson's team arrived at Lechfeld Airfield, located near Augsburg, they discovered a treasure trove, nearly 24 intact Me 262s, including an exceedingly valuable two-seat trainer variant. But the prize came with a set of dangers. Many of the aircraft had been sabotaged, damaged in bombing raids, or rigged with hidden explosives by retreating German forces. Overzealous American troops, unfamiliar with the delicate balance of jet landing gear, even managed to rip the nose assembly off one jet while attempting to tow it. And the biggest obstacle of all still remained. None of the Americans had ever flown a jet before, let alone the most advanced aircraft in the world. This is where former enemies became unlikely partners. Two German test pilots, Ludwig Willy Hoffmann and Karl Pete Bohr, Messerschmitt's chief test pilot, agreed to help train the Americans. Both men had spent years guiding Luftwaffe aces into the jet age, and now they found themselves performing that same task for the very nation that had defeated them. The Americans even gave one of the captured two-seat jets a nickname, Vera, honoring the sister-in-law of a crewman working on the project. On June 9, 1945, the training began. And the most astonishing detail, Watson's pilots received a mere 7 minutes, yes, 7 minutes, of in-flight instruction inside the dual-control Me 262 before they were sent up alone. These were men accustomed to propeller-driven aircraft like the P-47 Thunderbolt, machines that relied on piston engines, torque, and prop wash. The Me 262 was an entirely different beast, faster, smoother, and demanding razor-sharp precision. Yet they embraced the challenge with fearless determination. The next day, 9 Me-262s lined up for a ferry mission to France. For 5 of the American pilots, it was their first time flying a jet solo. Strobel, unable to resist the thrill, concluded his test flight with a vertical barrel roll. Watching from the ground, General Carl Tui Spots, the commanding general of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces, responded with wide-eyed amazement. Turning to Watson, he muttered, "That machine is wicked. Thank God they misused it." The Whizzers even designed their own unofficial insignia. Donald Duck straddling a jet engine while circling the globe. The captured jets and crates of documentation were transported to Cherbourg, where the British loaned the aircraft carrier HMS Reaper to haul everything across the Atlantic. Once at Wright Field in Ohio, American scientists began dismantling and studying every inch of the Me-262. What they discovered shocked them. Germany's engineering was years ahead, possibly a decade. The swept wings, which many had assumed were aesthetic, dramatically improved performance at high speeds. The leading-edge slats demonstrated breathtaking aerodynamic insight. Even the configuration of the engines beneath the wings revealed solutions to problems American designers hadn't yet encountered. Engineers such as Edgar Schmude and Larry Green pored over the German manuals and components, ultimately producing the North American F-86 Sabre, a jet whose lineage can be traced unmistakably to the Me-262. Across the ocean, Soviet engineers were doing the same, producing the Me-G-15. And in the skies over Korea only 5 years later, the F-86 and Me-G-15, descendants of German engineering, would duel at the edge of the sound barrier. But what became of Hans Fay's jet? The one he risked everything to deliver. It flew more test missions than any other captured Me-262. Yet on August 20, 1946, its story ended abruptly. Lieutenant Walter J.M.C. Ollie Jr. took the jet up for a routine evaluation flight near Dayton. Around midday, one of the engines burst into flames. M.C. Ollie slowed the aircraft, released the canopy, and bailed out. His escape was violent. The back of his head struck the tail, knocking his helmet into the sky. The parachute straps tore at his chin, and he sprained an ankle upon landing in a field of corn. Behind him, the aircraft, work number 111,711, spiraled helplessly into the ground near the town of Lumberton, Ohio, destroying one of the most historically valuable jets of the century. It had completed only 13 flights, but the Me-262's story was far from finished. In Czechoslovakia, where German factories had once forced local workers to assemble jet components, an unexpected opportunity emerged. After the liberation of the country, Czech engineers found themselves surrounded by half-completed airframes, engines, jigs, tools, and even stockpiles of original German paint. Instead of reverse engineering the aircraft, they decided simply to complete the unfinished jets. Beginning in 1946, the Avia company assembled a new series of Me-262s, now designated the S-92 Turbina for the single-seat version and the CS-92 for the trainer. Over the next 4 years, they produced a small fleet of 12. In 1950, Czechoslovakia formed an all-jet fighter squadron equipped entirely with these aircraft. For a brief moment, the very jets that had once terrorized Allied bombers soared peacefully over Central Europe wearing new markings. By 1951, however, the Soviet Union began supplying the far more advanced Me-G-15, leading to the retirement of the S-92 fleet. The last operational Me-262 variant quietly bowed out of service 6 years after the war had ended. Decades later, in 1993, a group of American aviation enthusiasts embarked on an ambitious mission to build new Me-262s from the ground up using original plans. Using the surviving trainer, Vera, as a reference, they engineered precise reproductions, but fitted them with modern General Electric CJ610 engines hidden inside housings that replicated the original Jumo 004 units. The old wartime engines, made of substitute alloys during Germany's resource shortages, had notoriously short lifespans, often less than 25 hours before catastrophic failure. The modern engines, however, brought reliability unimaginable in the 1940s. In 2002, the first new-build Me-262 took flight. Almost poetically, the landing gear malfunctioned during one of the early flights, echoing the countless gear troubles that had plagued the originals. Repairs were made, and eventually 5 replicas were completed, with 4 becoming fully airworthy. These modern Me-262s now grace air shows across the world, their engines screaming across the sky in a sound that once symbolized fear, but now evokes awe. In 2023, one of these replicas returned to British airspace, the first Me-262 type aircraft to fly there since the 1940s. Today, only a handful of original German-built Me-262s survive in museums. The Smithsonian houses one. Another sits in the National Naval Aviation Museum, and the historic 2-seat Vera remains preserved as well. Many of the German pilots who once flew them ended up working for American aerospace programs, including Karl Bohr himself, who became an American aircraft engineer until his death in 1963. So what became of the Me-262 after World War II? It became the blueprint for the jet age. Every major air power that laid hands on one studied it, copied it, or directly built upon its innovations. The Americans produced the F-86 Sabre. The Soviets birthed the Me-G15. The British refined the Meteor. The Czechs built their own operational fleet. Even the massive Boeing B-47 inherited aerodynamic lessons pioneered by the Me-262. Look at any modern fighter, the F-22, F-35, Eurofighter Typhoon, and you can still see the DNA of Germany's first jet fighter echoed in the sweep of the wings and the philosophy of its design. The Me-262 did nothing to save the right that created it. It entered combat too late, in numbers too small, against odds too impossible. But in the decades that followed, it reshaped the future of aviation. From Hans Fay's life-risking defection, to American pilots learning jet flight in mere minutes, to Czechoslovakia quietly flying them into the 1950s, to modern replicas, streaking through today's skies, the Me-262 stands as proof that wars are not always won on the battlefield. Sometimes they are won in the engineering notebooks left behind. Sometimes they are won in the innovations passed down across generations. Germany lost the war, but the Me-262 won the future. If you enjoy stories like these from the hidden corners of aviation history, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next forgotten tale waiting to be uncovered.